Welcome to the Freelance Journalism Podcast. I'm Catherine Reynolds Lewis with my co-host Erika Hayasaki. And today's episode, what really resonated with me was the notion of how to get your reps in. Because as a freelancer, having been a wire service reporter for Bloomberg News, writing 3 or 4 stories a day, I am so efficient and I can write and report and edit so quickly that I'm able to get a really good hourly rate. But Erika, what did that bring up for you from today's conversation?
Yeah, I love talking to Chris. I thought about how I got my reps in after leaving the LA Times, where I also did a lot of daily writing and feature writing and tried to break into magazines, and for years was just being ignored and, getting rejections. So in the beginning, I had to write for places that sometimes were lesser known or didn't pay as well. They always paid, but didn't pay as well. As I started to build up my portfolio in the magazine world, and that started to finally, after a couple of years, lead to better assignments.
So hope you enjoyed the conversation.
My name is Erika Hayasaki, and I'm with the Institute for Independent Journalists, which has a mission for the financial and emotional sustainability of freelancers of color. And we're all so glad you're here. I'm a freelancer. I'm also a professor. I teach in the literary journalism program at UC Irvine, which we have a little history here, Chris,
yeah.
UC Irvine. So I wanted to introduce our guest, Chris Gayomali. Am I saying your last name right?
Gayomali.
Gayomali.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
Oh,
Chris Gayomali. I should have checked that before. Chris is a freelance writer and editor. Most recently, he was the articles editor for GQ. And before that, he was the editor for GQ.com. He has a lot of experience working with freelancers. And I also know that as a professor at UC Irvine, we had some time on campus, although I think we missed each other. So I think that's where I want to start.
Yeah.
From what I understand, I came right out of the newspaper world. I was at the LA Times for a long time, and I just sort of transitioned into teaching, and I didn't really know what I was doing at all. They just put me in the classroom, and I learned on the way. But you, I guess, were a student at UC Irvine.
Yeah.
Probably. When were you there?
I was there from 2003 to 2007.
Okay.
So, I also was not a Lit J major, which is a mild regret in my life because the program sounded amazing. And, I was kind of the kid in the English program who never went to class and was always at the anti-mall in, what is it, Santa Ana? Or no. Anyway, near South Coast Plaza. And so that's where you could find me anytime there was something to do.
I hear you. So you decided to major in English. Did you always have journalistic career ambitions? Or how did that?
So, graduating in 2007 was interesting because right after graduating was the financial crisis. And so basically all the jobs disappeared off the board. I was kind of working a dead-end job in Irvine for a while after I graduated. I was doing like copy editing of, report papers for an insurance company that vetted like medical accidents. So it was like deeply soul-sucking work that and podcasts and all that other fun stuff didn't even exist back then. So I was kind of going through the drudgery. And about a year into it, I kind of like made the decision to pick up and move to New York. I didn't know what I was going to do when I got here, and then sort of just fell into journalism as I got here.
So you just fell into journalism. So interesting because it's hard. It's so hard for so many people to get. I have so many students in literary journalism program. It's an undergraduate program, and we teach like feature writing. Basically, it's long form narrative type of stuff. But a lot of students try to graduate, and they're trying to get internships. And moving to New York has been beneficial for some of the students who wanted to make that move. But so you were working in this job and just decided to pick up and go. And how did you fall? How does one fall into journalism?
Oh, that's an excellent question. It was a little bit more intentional than that, but I got my first job in New York, and it was sort of like it was like an assistant job at like the United Nations. I was working at UNICEF, where I was like an assistant there, doing like a lot of like just helping old ladies learn how to use Facebook during the job. But I also like sort of maintain like a personal blog that has thankfully been scraped off the internet, and just did a lot of like secret writing and blogging during my day shifts, tucked away in a dark corner. And I kind of use that to sort of score my first byline, which was at the Atlantic, which was made possible by a friend at the Atlantic who was an intern there. Introduced me to her editor, showed her some of my clips on my personal blog, and she was like, "Oh, this is pretty good. Why don't you hit me with an idea?" And it was kind of like a free for all era where the Atlantic was taking everything. So I submitted an article. Please do not Google it because it's deeply embarrassing. And it got like, one tiny little line edit. But from that single clip, I was sort of able to like, trade up. Do you know that like parable where it's like, you trade the paperclip up to a boat or whatever? It was kind of like that. I've just been trading this like teensy little byline that is like so poorly written and shoddily researched up ever since. And now I have a career in journalism.
Yeah. And did you have to learn how to do journalism, or is that something you just sort of learned on the fly? While doing, which I think is the best way to learn.
Yeah. Honestly, it was on the fly. I actually went to like a publishing program at NYU concurrently while I like got my first internship, which kind of like gave me the I kind of took it because I needed the network. Had zero out here, and I also needed just like a little bit of space to not have to work like a 40-hour job to like learn how to do stuff. And you kind of get thrusted in. I was learning everything about like cheap SEO tricks and how to call people up and what a TK is, what a fact check is. Like these were all new, totally foreign terms that I was getting introduced to on the fly. But it was kind of like a weird osmosis thing where you're just kind of around all these people who are really passionate about doing journalism and are actually doing it. So I kind of just had to, nod along and be like, yeah, I know what that is. and secretly I would like Google whatever the thing is and like figure it out while I was doing it.
Nice. And so then did you immediately move into editing, and how do you go from freelancing stories for the Atlantic and other places and then into an editing role?
Oh, totally. So I had a couple of, internships. My first one, I think it was at Esquire, and then went over to Men's Journal. So I kind of got sucked into all like the men's magazines void back when they were actually thick magazines and had pages to them. And then I got a friend through my program hooked it up with a job doing web production work at time.com.
Okay.
So, I was like helping, build slideshows and like do, sort of helping rebuild articles and stuff like drudgery like that. And then I kind of like on a whim, just like sort of pitched a loose idea for a blog to the technology editor at the time, who was running this site called Techland, which was kind of like a Gizmodo competitor. On a whim, wrote it, tried to make it funny, they took it, published it, and then the thing had like bonkers traffic to it and did really, really well. And so from then I was like, hey, maybe I should pretend to be a tech journalist, with my shattered, not even working BlackBerry, which was, for the youngs on this
BlackBerry.
Call, pre
yes, I remember those
days. And so pretended like try to learn as much as I can about technology and covering that world. And then that event, when my friend's job opened up over there, I kind of put myself in a position to take her job and did that for a little bit and kind of got my sea legs there, doing a lot of blogs every day.
Mm-hmm. And then you ended up doing feature editing.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I don't know how long after, but you were working on stories at GQ. How did that come about?
Yeah, so from there, I went to, after Time, I went to a publication called The Week, and continued covering technology, science, the social media stuff. Then went to Fast Company and kind of fashioned myself into a business and tech reporter over there. That's where I really learned how to like do a lot of interviews and call people up and like that sort of part of the job. And then, funny enough, one of my old editors at Men's Journal, who was then at GQ, his name was John Wild. This was like in the very early Instagram days where you could only post on the grid. I had posted like a picture of like a pork chop over rice that I was eating alone in Chinatown. And then he left a message or a comment underneath. He was like, "Hey, this is weird. Can you email me? Here's my email." So I emailed him and he was like, "Oh, we have a job opening at GQ. Would you be interested in applying?" And I was like, "Oh, yeah, of course. Like, this is a dream job." And it was for the online culture editor. And at that point I had done no real sort of editing myself. I think I had good ideas, and I was able to, do work that I think was entertaining and resonated with people, and I knew how to report, but I had never like managed people or done any of that. And so when I got this job, I was editing and managing 2 people immediately. And so kind of had to figure out how to do that on the fly, and like learn how to leave comments in a doc and all that kind of stuff, which was an interesting exercise. But I quickly realized that it really is just about maintaining a relationship, reading that person, letting them know that you have their best interest in making the work great. And so that's sort of been my approach to editing and managing ever since, and kind of only grew from there.
Yeah. So I would love for you to talk about the editing process.
Yes.
I think, and I know it's probably different. It is different at every place you work.
Yeah.
And then if you're working on online and if you're working for the magazine, can you walk us through the process of, pitch to story to actual publication? Because I know there's many layers, many people weigh in. How does that work? Or maybe it's different. They don't all weigh in for everything, but how does that work?
It's a little different depending, like you said, between digital and for print. Digital, when I was running, I eventually worked my way up to run GQ.com. And so what I sort of looked for in a pitch was, did this kind of have a little bit of energy behind it? Like, did this person do their research before, I was kind of allergic a little bit to like the 2-sentence pitches where it was just like, "Hey, let me write about, the weekend," or whatever. It's like, what's the idea behind here? Or something that was really access driven. So I kind of looked for pitches that like, were a little bit, from a new writer, I was always looking for something a little bit more modest. Like it's like, I want to write like a 800 word thing about like this specific influencer who I've already talked to, and they agreed to talk to me about this, and here's why I think they're interesting. And it kind of had hit all the notes for why the story works, why it fits for the publication, and why we should take a chance on it. And from there, it's like, I kind of developed a long-standing relationships with a lot of these writers who were early in their careers, and then they grow. I grew into this role where I was editing longer print articles down the line. And so oftentimes the way it worked at GQ for a lot of our features, at least, was the editors would get together and talk about the stories we were kind of interested in seeing, and then we would cast a wide net to a bunch of writers on what they thought about said topic. And we would kind of go from there and do a lot of the Jenga puzzle in real time, hoping that it doesn't topple over, and try to make the best assignment that we could.
Yeah. What do you mean by the Jenga puzzle? Like, how does that work? How is it a puzzle?
Oh yeah. It's what else they have going on, like the logistics, the timing, the time investment in terms of how long it would take to report, what their idea is, and if they're bringing like a fresh sort of perspective or idea or style even to the idea. One that we got really creative with was during lockdown, actually. I don't know if the listeners will be familiar with this, but the NBA kind of did that weird bubble thing at Disney World, and we're like, dude, how do we like figure out what's our story about the NBA bubble? It's like so GQ, like it's all the people we care about and cover, and they're sequestered away in this like giant fantasy land away from everyone, while like the world is on fire and COVID is all around us.
Right.
And so it ended up being that, like, in order to send a reporter in, it would cost like $50,000, which was like money that like basically only the New York Times had and no one else.
I don't know if they would pay that though.
I know. Well, they actually ended up paying for that, which is really funny. So there was one other big feature on this. But we got a little creative, and we were like, okay, who do we know who's like a reporter in there? And there was this amazing reporter. Her name was Taylor Rooks. She's more of a TV reporter. Does a lot of stuff on broadcasts, really talented, has great relationships with all the players, but had never written a long feature before. But she had a great relationship with someone else on staff. And like we got on a Zoom and like all talked about like, hey, what could like a story sort of look like from inside the bubble? You're already in there. You're talking to these players all day. What do you know? And how can we help you? And so I worked with her very closely to sort of stitch together this great story about like how weird all the athletes felt. These multimillionaire men who are like in these tiny Mickey Mouse beds or whatever, and who are, just playing basketball and going to the pool every day and eating Disney food in between all their meals. It was just like a fascinating sort of logistical look at what life was like inside the NBA bubble. And, I think the story ended up being a big hit. Got picked up in the Best American Sports Writing, and props to Taylor for having like all the reporting chops, and I just kind of helped her structure and get her sentences nice and sturdy, and like figure out how to best tell the story, and that was a really rewarding one.
That's awesome. So for writers who are trying to break in, there's I know you mentioned working with newer writers and working with them on shorter pieces for the web. And then for those long form pieces, are you generally turning to people you know already? It sounds like this particular one had it in, but hadn't necessarily done a lot of long form. How does that work to make the transition from, the shorter pieces to the long form kind of magazine style pieces for writers?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is, from the writer's end, it is relationship building. It's like building a sort of trust with the editor that you're going to be able to deliver this thing, which is, let's face it, it's kind of, there's not much print inventory these days. You and I both know, like, have had this conversation many times whenever we try to get a story off the ground.
Yeah.
It's like magazines are down to like 8-10 issues a year. There's maybe one feature slot. So it's very hard territory to sort of elbow your way into.
Yeah.
And for younger writers, I would advise, like, find the editors that you sort of trust. It's going to take like a lot of working with different people and figuring out who's like kind of on a wavelength that you enjoy working with. And proving that you're sort of the reliable person who brings a lot of creativity and enthusiasm and curiosity to the job. And I think that goes a long way, honestly. Like, that's at least kind of what I always looked for in the writers that I enjoyed working with and developing relationships with.
Yeah, I have noticed for a lot of magazines, especially in the last several years, they're moving to even an online, like a lot of the women's magazines.
Yeah.
Or they're like a combination of like a couple print magazines now and mostly online.
Yeah.
Does that affect the pitching process for writers too, somewhat?
I think it does, because one way I like to think about it is, honestly, like the economics of it, like, just mean that web stories don't pay as much, which is just like, it's an adjacency issue. It's, print magazines typically have luxury advertising in it, and that has a separate budget versus the web part of the process. But oftentimes you could knock the park out of a digital only story that gets elevated to print because, maybe some other story falls through, and, then you end up getting that print rate in the end for, and it's totally unfair being on that side of it now too. It's like, I'm seeing it with like a different set of eyes, and I'm like, this is crazy.
It is. I definitely want to talk about that too.
Yeah. But it's like the same, it's like, oftentimes the same amount of reporting and the same amount of work and all of that, but it is like sort of like doing it in the expectation that like when that print assignment does come along and your number is called, it's like you're going to be able to do it. You know what I mean?
Right.
So that's what's tricky. And then I don't think anyone's really cracked a fairer model yet, but it is kind of like once you get into that print tier, you're kind of like on call. And, honestly, there's like not very many people in the world who can, deliver at that high level consistently. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like a rarefied air to get into. But it's very
cool. Can you give an idea of the pay difference between
typically for print, at least at GQ, was typically around $2 a word, but it was like more like project based. That was like, but it was kind of used as an estimation tool for how long it is. Maybe a cover story will get you around like 10,000, 12,000, depending on the writer. And then online is typically closer to $1, sometimes $1.50. But I know a lot of publications these days like don't go above $1.50 even for print oftentimes. So it's pretty tough.
Yeah, it is good advice that you mentioned. Just like once you do land one of those, as hard as it is to land a print feature, then you're sort of getting more editors at least reaching out to you and offering those opportunities. So it's sort of like breaking through that transition, right?
Yeah. And then you become a known quantity, and then you kind of it's kind of funny. I think back like to a couple of years ago when you would kind of see the same writers everywhere writing for every magazine, your byline included. And it was cool, and I never really understood how that worked in practice, but it makes sense. It's just like it's very specific, very hard work, and not a lot of people can do that off the jump, and you kind of need to get your reps in before you can build up to it, I think.
But it's also so great to have an editor. I mean, we need to create more of those opportunities for people to not just like sort of put them in a box of always writing an 800-word story if they have goals to do a longer form one. So you mentioned that one that you edited, and you were able to sort of work with that writer. So to have an editor who can help shape a piece and get you to the next step is huge for a writer. Can you talk about the process of, working on a story to shape it, to get it, what it means for you as an editor also to get it to that point, and to help a writer along who's, trying to do their best work and get to that level.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is, making FaceTime to meet up and like talk about it. A lot of the relationships I think I've sort of built have been like, oh, like, hey, I'm visiting California right now. Do you want to get a coffee or something? And then a writer and I would like, get coffee. They'd talk about what they're thinking about, what they're interested in. And then it gave me like a really good perspective of like, oh, this is what they care about. This is cool. And then so you kind of file that away in your head of like what they might be good at when future opportunities come up. And also, I think for me especially, it's like when people were printing or pitching me like online stuff, and if they brought like really zany ideas, I kind of loved it. I was just like, my whole thing as an editor is like, man, like we have SEO flattening all the stories on the web. Everyone's doing the same stuff, and now even now more perniciously with AI coming and sort of like further flattening creativity and all that stuff. It's like, what is the very real human weird story that you'd be able to do that no one else could do? And and sometimes it's like that comes in a very silly form. And that's honestly a good Trojan horse for me, at least as an editor. Like I had one writer, he was like, we had been friendly for a while, but he was like, I have a really stupid idea for you. And I was like, it kind of like made all my antennas stand up right away. And he was like, what if I tried to live in a Wee Spa in LA for 48 hours and see if I could get away with it? And I was like, yes, that's really funny. Yeah, let's give it a shot.
I've been to the Wee Spa in LA, and I've wondered if people have ever. I want to read that story now.
Oh yeah, it was so funny, and like he was a book editor at the time and had never written a piece like this, but took that chance. We talked a lot about a lot of the notes we wanted to hit. we thought about how we wanted to, make the story feel propulsive and that it had like sort of like goals stitched in that like the writer was trying to pursue.
Nice.
And, it was like, it took on a little bit of a life of its own and became a really funny thing. And then, it was like, oh, a great relationship was built from that. And then like, if a story came up at a later time that was like a perfect fit for a profile or something, or for a print rate, I would have hit them up, so.
Yeah. So building those relationships,
Mm-hmm.
having FaceTime, although I know editors are also really busy. Like, I don't know what was, I always try to put myself in the editor's shoes because sometimes you find yourself waiting for pitch responses or edits or whatever that might be. And so what is your life like trying to field everything at once? Like,
oh, it's a lot of like mental filtering. Oh, that's so funny because I got like a text from an editor like right before this meeting. He was like, "Hey, can you hop on a quick call?" After not hearing from him for like 3 weeks.
Right. So typical.
Yeah, typical. Quick call. I understand, but it's like I totally understand.
Yeah, you've been there.
Yeah, it's like and what's really hard about editing, I think, is that it's such it's a work. It's like two extremes of the job. Like on one hand, you need to be able to sort of narrow your vision and do deeply focused work where you're diving into the text and really thinking about it. And you need to carve out like, the 2 hours to really like, it's like deep cognitive work that's really hard, and thinking about like which way can I take the story that would actually improve it.
Mm-hmm.
And then you almost need to immediately flip to like a Zoom where it's like, you need like 10 ideas for this forthcoming issue about creativity or something, you know what I mean? So, and then that's like a different skill set where it's like, oh, a lot of research. I need to read around and do all of this and let my mind wander. And so that's sort of like the two extremes of the job in some ways. And then you also have to be communicative to be a good editor, which is like that's the hard part where unfortunately like the emails get lost and like it takes weeks to call back and all that kind of stuff. So it's a lot of toggling during the workday. A lot of times like and it's messed up that you have to take calls like after work hours and stuff like that. But it's just it's a lot to fit in, and I think that's just like weirdly the modern economics of it, where editorial work isn't prioritized by the business side of a lot of these publications like it used to be.
What is just for context, like what's the pitch rate? Like how many pitches are you getting a week usually that you have to read? And
maybe it was like at 2 or 3 really considered pitches a day that I would like take like some real time to like read through, and oftentimes like the really well written, and I think you sort of give a pitch more attention when it's written tonally in how the story is going to be communicated. I think that's a really good signal to send to editors. It's like, oh, here's my voice. Here's kind of what the story would look like on like a meta level. That's unsaid in the piece. You know what I mean? And I think that goes a long way. A lot of pitches I would get like that read a little bit like a Wikipedia summary, where kind of just like my eyes would kind of gloss over a little bit, even if it was like super, original material or something like that. So voice went a long way for me.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about what you're doing now. So you've transitioned into the freelance writing side, or are you also editing, or how? Where are you at now?
So I dove into the Substack world. I started writing a newsletter called Heavies. It's about health and wellness, and Heavies was what someone at my gym once called like the really big kettlebells. And I was like, oh, that's a really funny name. Let me run with that. I'm kind of a workout fiend and think about that stuff all the time. I'm like a Muay Thai competitor at my gym. That's kind of like my main preoccupation and keeps me sane with all the other writing and editing work. been having a lot of fun doing that, and like it's a cool thing. Like on the Substack backend are a lot of writers who I used to see on Twitter in like 2015, and so it's kind of nice reconnecting with a bunch of old friends and in that sort of way. I'm like freelancing for a bunch of places, trying to get some stories off the ground. And the thing I'm realizing too is like delivering a pitch at a level that I would kind of accept it at, like, takes a lot of work. And like that's like a part of the job that I didn't realize I was going to be very slow at, like mentally.
Because it's the unpaid part for us.
Yes, exactly.
It's like you have to develop the story, but that's like time, right?
Oh, totally. You have to do pre-reporting. You have to sort of see the beats a little bit in advance, not knowing if it's actually going to hit those story beats when you actually report it out and start writing. It requires some foresight, and it's a muscle I'm still personally developing a little bit. And then I'm doing some freelance editing, some consulting work for brands, which is really funny because it's like I'll look at the economics of that. And I'm like, copywriting on some level for a place like Nike or something pays just as much as writing a feature. So so I'm like, oh, this is like way easier. Like, why don't I do this more often?
Right. Well, that's so interesting. So you're doing lots of different, sort of the typical life of a freelancer is dabbling in a lot of different things or working in a lot of different areas. And so you've got the Substack, and I wonder, I know that's new, you just started it, but what made you decide to go that route? Has it been nice so far? Has it worked out, or are you sort of filling it out?
Yeah, it's cool. I'm like exercising old blog muscles that I had since atrophied a little bit. And also like the running a website. And I'm like, oh, this is what it's like to run a website again. But the only labor force is me. So it's kind of cool. Like I have more ideas than I do have time to actually make those ideas happen, but it's cool. I'm starting to figure out how to make the work of the newsletter intertwine with like the work I'm doing for other publications.
Yeah.
And that feels very modern and cool. Like it's like, oh, if I do a piece for, let's say National Geographic or something that's like sort of in this wheelhouse, maybe I could provide some, behind the scenes footage on my Substack or something like that. And sort of like put some stuff that didn't make it into the final cut of the story there. And so it's cool. It's cool. Like, exploring all of this stuff, and it's all like comes from a place of just like wanting to learn a bunch of shit that I know nothing about. And, it's been a lot of fun. I really like it.
So it sounds like your Substack is working in service with your freelance work too. So it's sort of intertwined with what you're interested in. And when you do the freelance work, you mentioned brand work and also magazine work. How are you finding those? Are you just cold pitching? Or are you working with different connections you've already had? How do you find both, like the magazine work and the brand work?
Yeah, so the brand work, I work with this group of friends called C47. It's run by my friend Phil Chang, who I met through doing magazine work. It's all connected. When I did a cover story on Steven Yeun for GQ, he was one of Steven's homies.
Great piece.
I wanted to. Oh, thank you. I wanted to interview him for the piece, but he couldn't do it for whatever reason, and we just kept in touch. And whenever some brand work came up, he hit me up, and we became good friends. And so, but the magazine stuff, I've been pretty fortunate. I did a viral piece a couple years ago about guys who got their legs artificially lengthened during COVID.
Yes.
And so that kind of went viral, and I became known as like the leg lengthening guy. So I get a lot of cold pitches from editors who are like, hey, we want your next leg lengthening.
Wow.
Which is a funny way to put it, because that was a story that had gestated for like years in my brain, and like, it's like, oh, that was kind of like a one of one thing. And I'm sure you run into this too as a writer, where you're like, oh, I don't want to be pigeonholed into something, so you want to stretch your legs in like different directions and try different things. It's interesting. But I get hit up a lot for like ideas sort of in that realm. And some of them work out and some of them don't.
Yeah, I mean, the pigeonholing is interesting because also I just wonder, I'm really curious. I don't in the magazine world often get to work with editors of color.
Yeah.
Asian American magazine editors. Certainly it's like few and far between. And I'm wondering like how the experience is in the editor side and even the freelance side. Like, do you feel that?
Oh, totally. Every day. Yeah. Well, you know what's really funny? Like I grew up in Long Beach. One of the most diverse cities in the US. So, and then went to UC Irvine, which was super Asian in a different way. And was like always surrounded by like Asian people. And kind of that just felt normal. And then when I moved out to New York and I would be in these rooms at meetings, especially at magazines, I'm like, wait, there's a lot of white people here. What's Connecticut? I don't know what that is. Like, tell me a little bit more about Yale or whatever.
Right.
And so it was kind of a lot of, like, it's like, it's cliche, but it's like the little bit of imposter syndrome thing.
Sure. Yeah.
But then, I came to understand that it was just like, oh, I bring a pretty fresh perspective to all of this. My sense of like what's an interesting story is vastly different from yours.
Yeah.
And it kind of became a little bit of a superpower in some ways, because it's like, oh, I'm seeing like the field in a different way than most of you guys are. And I think that's allowed me to do a lot of original work, work from a different perspective. I think I tackled that Stephen Yun story in a way that, I wasn't interested in hitting a lot of the typical identity tropes about, what it meant to be Asian American and feel seen and stuff. It's like I wanted to really push that conversation in new ways. And he was like a perfect sort of, conduit and spokesperson and thinker for a lot of those like big ideas. And we kind of broed out a little in our like in our conversations, and it went really deep. As a writer, I'm like just sort of not interested in ideas that hit a sort of expectation. You know what I mean? It's like I kind of want work that pushes things in new directions and like gets people talking about things in a new way.
Yeah, and it sounds like for you, what you've been able to do successfully is sort of listening to your own instincts on what a story is, or just how to make it work, how to make it flow if you're editing. And even when I think you mentioned that there was the leg lengthening story, which is like took a while to get off the ground.
Yeah.
And sometimes you're like, I know when you're in the process of trying to get something off the ground, you're like, it's so hard. You can't even see the day when somebody reads it. And then suddenly it's like, oh, everybody's reading that.
I know. It's
Yeah.
Yes. I think
Go ahead.
For me, it's like, I don't think I'm the smartest person in a lot of rooms I come in. Maybe often I'm like the dumbest, maybe it's a SoCal thing, but
I have that feeling all the time.
Yeah. It's like, it's so funny, but like, I think for me, at least, it's like, seeing little successes all along the way, from that very first blog that I did for Time to like, leg lengthening, going mega viral, and then them doing an SNL sketch on it, kind of like helped me build my confidence to be like, oh, like actually like my shit is really good. Like the people, it resonates with people. Maybe it's even reaching people who aren't typically like, consumers of journalism or reading in a new way. And I often think about that, like, I grew up in a household that like, we subscribed to the Press Telegram, basically, which was the local Long Beach paper, rest in peace. And maybe Time and Glamour, you know what I mean? It's like, we weren't a huge reader journalism household. Like I didn't know what the New Yorker was until college,
Same.
Right. And I was like, then I was like, wait, these are really long and there's no pictures in this. This is crazy. Like, there's just these little doodles. It's kind of helped me figure out like what I'm good at, and it's helped me figure out like where the sort of open lanes are that I can kind of fill in the industry. And that's been really nice. Like, it's like, oh, okay. Even with my Substack, I'm kind of like, oh, actually, no one's talking about health and wellness in like a way that isn't for like musclehead dummies. You know what I mean? Or
Right.
like, or totally gooped out, or maybe there's a middle space that allows for like a non-Eurocentric perspective where it's like we can just understand that acupuncture works and Pfizer is never going to underwrite a study proving the effectiveness of these little needles when they can sell you opioids or whatever. You know what I mean? It's like that kind of stuff. It's like,
yeah. I think that's really good advice as we sort of come to a close about, especially for people who are listening or are trying to navigate this world of freelance. And maybe you can even talk about how hard it is just with all of the layoffs and the closures of magazines and the squeezing of print and everything else. I mean, this is hard. It's hard work all along the way, getting the stories in, doing the editing. And a lot of the times we can just sort of lose, confidence in ourselves, especially if you feel like you're the only one in the room. Or, it just feels very lonely. You don't have the connections of everybody who went to the colleges that are the people in the media. So I'm just wondering, like, if you have thoughts for people or thoughts for us about the state of the industry and like how they can survive it.
Totally. Yeah. It is a very lonely thing. Like a pitch will go unresponded to for like 2 weeks on my end, and I'm like, oh, do I hit the little follow up? Like, sorry if you missed this, and like like the little
it's humbling. It's humbling, right?
It's so humbling. I think where I've been doing this sort of long enough that I understand that the industry's like ups and downs kind of come in waves at this point. And sort of looking to where the changes are happening. It's interesting. I was talking to a writer friend the other day about why it's kind of hard these days to find younger writers who are like, really promising talents. And we kind of realized there was like a lot of there was kind of a generation gap where a lot of young talent went to like BuzzFeed and started making listicles right out of college and like, doing the GIFs and all that. And then a lot of people like ended up becoming creators on like TikTok and, so a lot of the creativity and energy that would have went into like a writing job was kind of hard. But, now there are things like Substack or, even like, you could still fire up a blog spot, and kind of like get your reps in that way. And get some notice. And it's like the thing with Substack, it's like there's a lot of editors and writers there. You can build your own little communities. And I think that's kind of where you kind of find the antidote to a lot of the loneliness that is like doing this solitary writing work, and it's like I've like made new friends through Substack already, and like I've like built relationships with other writers and editors and stuff like that. So that's been really, heartening, and understanding that the finances and economics of all this stuff goes up and down, and probably when they realize that maybe a recession won't hit in like the fourth quarter and there's a giant job hiring spree or something, like maybe it'll turn around a little bit before plummeting back again in like 8 years or something.
Yeah, I know. It's all the writing on all these ups and downs. On the Substack, is there any like income that comes from that yet? I know it's new, or is that?
Oh yeah. I have a paid tier. I'll be like right now it's like I'll be transparent about it. I have like 3,000 subscribers total. A little bit under 300 of which are paid subscribers, and it's like $5 a month. So that works out to be like a not a bad chunk of change, not enough to be the main thing yet, but there are people on there who are like making six figures who have like brought their large audiences with them over the years over to their Substacks. And so I was like, oh wow, like that's cool, and seems like a really sustainable way to like have an income.
And you've only been on there a couple of months.
So it's nice. If I didn't have a kid and like could be like a little bit of a a sad lonely guy for a little bit and had to build it up that way, that would maybe I would write it out a little bit longer, but trying to do a bunch of other work and find a full-time job elsewhere and all that stuff still. So figuring it all out. Everyone's figuring it out,
What is your Substack so people can follow it?
It's heavies.substack.com.
Got it. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Chris. I'm really glad we got a chance to talk. Like I know we've talked, but not face to face.
I know.
We've talked. So it's weird like that. in this
I
world.
know. Yeah, I think we talked in like the pre-Zoom era too, where it was just like everyone was just doing phone calls, which is kind of funny to think about now.
I know.
Yeah. I do
so much.
Really regret not being able to get a story off the ground with you, because it would have been so much fun to cook with you, and like especially working with other Asian writers, and it's like a lot of those layers that you would have to like sort of explain to a writer. I think would have been gone, and it would have been like a really fun process, I think.
Oh, well, there's still lots of time. We're still kicking. And also come talk to next time you're in California, come talk to my students at UC Irvine. They're young, they are undergrads, and they are in that early experience of trying to figure out what they're doing, but we have a lot of talented writers, and I'm sure you can find some talent over there.
Yeah, I'll show them. I'll do a little slideshow and show them pictures of like how much of a loser I was on campus with like my stoner hats, skateboarding around and ditching class.
That would be amazing.
Bad, and like it's like
I can't tell you. I have students who like sort of blew off my class and ended up as editors at Wired. So like clearly, it is what it is.
I know. And then I'll go for chopper tea and see how that holds up or whatever.
Yeah, definitely come visit.
Okay, I will. That sounds great.
And thank you so much for taking the time to do this, and good luck with everything that you're doing in your next steps. I'll be sure to follow it all closely, as well as your Substack.
Thank you, Erika.
Thank you. You too.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
The Freelance Journalism Podcast is a production of the Institute for Independent Journalists. Our mission is the emotional and financial sustainability of freelancers of color. Learn more about our work at theiij.com and use the code POD10 for a discount on our annual conference and other events open for registration now. That's POD number 10. And please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, or like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, or both. You can find our free webinars and other offerings on YouTube. And your recommendation and sharing with friends is the greatest compliment and helps us discover new listeners. Thanks for listening.